Really pleased today to welcome all of you, but also to welcome Dr. Carlton Sapp, who has graciously agreed to spend time with us today. He kind of got backed into this a little bit, but I won't go into the background on that, but I really appreciate him and his time today. Dr. Sapp is the Managing Vice President for the Data Analytics for Technical Professionals team in the Gartner Inc. Organization, which some of you will be aware of, and I'll talk a little bit in a moment about how we engage with Gartner. Some of you will be aware that we are a Gartner campus and use Gartner in a number of different ways, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. So welcome to you, Dr. Carlton Sapp, and I'm going to refer to you as Carlton during this conversation.
Please do.
If that's all right with you. However, I do want to tell everybody a little bit about you. So Dr. Sapp provides guidance on systems engineering. Get ready for this because I don't know how you do all of this. That provides guidance on systems engineering, digital threads, digital twin, model-based systems engineering, edge intelligence, artificial intelligence, machine learning, modern data management strategies, data ingestion strategies, streaming analytics, data integration, and Internet of Things analytics, amongst many other things. So you can tell that we are dealing with somebody today who truly is an expert in their field. And again, so grateful for you making time for us today. You have a really fascinating background. I'm going to give you a few minutes to talk a little bit about this as you get started today. But Carlton has been part of the Department of Defense contracts. He's worked in technology. He's worked in research. He's worked for IBM. He's been a consultant. He's worked for the National Science Foundation, has worked in information systems. And of course, he's got a myriad of degrees as well, including a PhD in systems engineering from George Washington University. So quite accomplished, and it's really quite inspiring to see all of the wonderful things that you have been doing. And you're only 20 years old. I don't understand how that's possible, but it is obviously.
I love it. Thank you.
It's a miracle of science and intelligence.
That's right.
Yeah, for sure. And so before I hand off to you, Carlton, I just wanted to give people a quick overview of Gartner, because I think, it is through the generosity of Gartner that you're here today. We as an institution do have Gartner subscriptions. We have the executive partnership, and many of you have met and interacted with Deborah Christmas or some of our other Gartner colleagues. And I really appreciate so much Gartner for the support that they have provided to our institution. They provide us with really excellent advanced IT research guidance and allow us to tap into amazing talent, similar to Carlton and including Carlton, where we can reach out and ask questions, get really cutting edge and forward-thinking advice and guidance on all array of information and information systems related initiatives. They provide us with RFP reviews, contract reviews, strategy assessments, peer interactions, and so much more than that. For the rest of you, and many of you I know are part of our McMaster IT community who are joining today, one of the things that I'm hoping you're aware of is that we also have a subscription for the Gartner for Technical Professionals, or GTP. It also provides all of you individually with access to research and practical guidance for technology, including roadmaps, implementation plans, tactical approaches to technology implementations, and also your own ability to tap into technical analysts for hour-long conversations as needed. So if I am saying this to you and you have no clue what I'm talking about, my advice to you is to please contact me after this and the team so that we can ensure that you're given access to this and some awareness around it, because it truly is a great resource for us and has over and over again proven such amazing value for us. So having given the advertising now, I want to flip back to you, Carlton, and again say thank you very much. And would you please provide us with your own perspective and personal identifying information so that we can get to know you a little bit better, besides just looking at the amazing background behind you.
Well, thank you for having me, and thank you everyone for joining. So it's really, truly a pleasure. So I spent most of my career actually in the public sector and DoD space, and So most of in fact, not to date myself, but back then, what we see equivalent or close to equivalent to AI used to be called sort of data mining. And if you really remember the knowledge discovery days, when we were building neural nets, we used to have to send them to universities because we didn't have compute infrastructure. DoD certainly didn't. We used to have to send our algorithms down to Texas, at the University of Texas, and they would run, and then we'd send them back. And 2 days later, we'd say, oh yeah, we found something. So it's been a wonderful journey to see how we've advanced compute space and done so much. So that's where I started. I really, back then, it was a lot around business intelligence, if we remember that. I was a part of the acquisition of Cognos and IBM, where it was Cognos was one of the programs I used to work on, called, I don't know, if not to date myself again, because I'm 20, but it used to be called Impromptu, was one of the in Power Play, were two of the applications that I worked on way back when it was a Canadian company. And then, of course, IBM acquired it later on. So it's been a wonderful career. And so my job here at Gartner is really to manage a team of AI experts and analytic experts specifically for the tech professional. So it's a little bit more tactical than what traditionally you might see at Gartner. We do collaborate with hype cycles and magic quadrants and all the branded material, but we're a little bit more detailed, focusing on the solution architect, focusing on the data scientist, and all of the engineers that are involved in that ecosystem of building an AI system. So it's a wonderful team. We have a team all over the globe working with end users to help them in critical design decisions, understanding the difference in technologies and tools and et cetera. So again, it's a pleasure to be here, and thank you. Thank you for allowing me to speak today.
Wow, you're so generous with your time. I'm certainly appreciative of that. And it's interesting because some of the things you've touched on, I've only been in higher ed IT for 23 years only, and yeah, I mean, some of those things, Cognos, of course, I think is something that I'm aware of. But we do know that this space is constantly maturing and changing. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what we're really interested in tapping into today is, where are we going? Your expertise will be really valuable. We had our McMaster IT forum in February, and we had originally touched base with you then. This is everybody when I said Carlton managed to get back into this. We'd originally reached out to him. And you have so much information, Carlton, that we thought, oh, it'd be so amazing if we could have you come and speak on your own, because we think that you've got a lot of wisdom that you can share with us and some good guidance and direction. We covered a lot of things in that panel as well, because we did have some really great expertise. We had John Weigelt from Microsoft as an example. We had one of our students who's really quite proficient in AI and is the president of our AI Society, Jacqueline. And then we also had one of our faculty members and instructors who integrates XR into his teaching practice, overseeing the anatomy environment, but definitely on from the medical perspective. So we really covered in a very short time a mass array of things. I think the thing for today, maybe as context or even an anchor in our conversation, is really understanding what it means to us as an institution. Obviously, when we're looking at technologies and the future, higher education reputationally is probably known as being slow. Our researchers are fast and they're focused and moving really quickly in areas. For us to move the big ship around newer technologies can sometimes be quite challenging. There's lots of moving parts and a lot of complexity in the environment. So we don't always get to move quite as quickly as we like to those future technologies, but we are trying to be innovative and agile where we can. The anchor point really being around data. And, quite often from a technologist perspective, we're really focused on that, the systems and the how we get to done on these things with the underpinning. But ultimately, and you know this better than I do, based on everything I said about your experience and background, data. It's really all about that. And so for AI, that's really what we want to be looking at, is how can that help us with our data? So maybe I can just kick you off in that direction and just say, can you tell us how to understand that whole concept around data first, and then what you see in this ecosystem to help support us with the use and value and gains that we can get from our data?
Yeah, I think and thank you for that. So one of the biggest things we've always heard this data is the fuel and data is this and oil and all that. And it's a little bit more than that. So what's challenging now about the data is not just the contextualizing of that data, the distribution of that data, but being also able to attach to some form of data, not just either collecting or connecting to that data across a broad spectrum of disciplines. And so that's what's really changing. And so what we have to start to think about when it comes to data as a foundation is not just data is the foundation. Data is really the lifeline to getting these systems to be enabled and getting these systems to be capable of solving these challenges. And the trick to that is how we acquire and manage that. So that's what's becoming a little bit more challenging is our data is much more distributed now, right? It's much more decentralized. It's not like we're collecting data, and we still do. Some organizations still use the monolithic warehousing approach and pull data in. But the reality of it is we need that data in real time. We need the data faster than we did before. So we need to start changing our mindset to say, not only do I want to collect data, I need to connect to that data, maybe in a different situation to solve a problem that is local to that environment. So these are some of the mindset changes that we're seeing organizations struggle with, but are making successful transitions into this new way of thinking about how do I leverage a distributed model of data that's spread throughout my enterprise.
I love that, and it's a great thing for us to think about as we start implementing a number of different systems on campus. So we do have our systems of record, and people do know and want to access that data for truth, and then to be able to use that. From an institution that is quite distributed in nature, we have, one community, many neighborhoods, and, lots of different ways people want to use that. I think that whole concept of how it's connected, and to your point, whether we call it the blood, the air, the whatever it is, it's infused into everything in terms of all the work that we do. So I'm curious about strategies around that. So is there a strategy that we can think about, or that you've seen approached, and I know this is very high level, we are not going to be able to get into the deep dive details of this, but something that you think we should be thinking about as we think about a data strategy and the use of artificial intelligence or augmented intelligence to support that? I don't know.
Absolutely.
Is that too general of a question? I'm not
No,
sure.
no, that's perfect. It leads me into really the formula that I always advise folks start to think about data, and especially when you talk about a strategy, right? Is there's four things I fundamentally need to do. Now, it's much more complex than these four things in terms of when we do them, how we do them, and how well we do them. But they are fundamentally the foundation, and that is, the recipe that you need is the acquire, right? I need to acquire data. I need acquisition of data, so consumption of data. I need to be able to organize that somehow. And that, again, we talked about that earlier, that can be in some form of a data warehousing or data lake or some storage mechanism. I need the capability to analyze that, and then I need to deploy or deliver it. So if we think about those four things that we always, that's the ingredients to the recipe. Now we can play around with it a little bit. So what's changing is with AI, again, as we said before, is not just the decentralized nature of data, but how we consume that data, where we can perform the analysis, how we provision analytics. All of those are changing, and we have to start thinking about adjacent disciplines that help us solve that problem. So infrastructure, for example, we used to think infrastructure was one thing. Now infrastructure are many things. It's a mobile phone. It's many things that we can use in our ecosystem to solve problems. So we're going to take those ingredients. I always advise, take those ingredients, the acquire, the organize, the analyze, and deliver, mix them together and come up with your perfect recipe that's fit for purpose for your objectives. And there's a lot of things in between that need to happen that help in that sort of cookbook. And, things like integration, which is becoming something of a old problem, but being addressed with new challenges. So there are a number of integration techniques that I think are underrated in terms of being able to solve problems, because once I acquire data from a different set of, or connecting to data from different disciplines, I need to be able to understand contextually what that means to me. And a lot of that now is done in integration. So there are a lot of opportunities that I think we have to build these massive recipes that are fit for purpose for our organizations.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that that's the challenging piece. It's daunting, really, because we do know in an environment like ours, you've been in public sector, you know that we're pulling and have data from all sorts of different places, and
Mhm.
how people want to use that can be quite different depending upon the constituency as well. So the challenge, I love the way you've broken this down into these 4 chunks, because that helps, right? Anything you can do to simplify the complexity of a
Right.
question, especially around something as big as data strategy, the better for people to be able to figure out how they can do their part, and break things down into more digestible approaches. But from your own experience in the public sector,
Mhm.
have you seen, or is there a way that you've seen organizations adapt these newer technologies, AI as an example, or integrate them into what are pretty old school environments in some cases? And as I said, we move a little bit slower in public sector, I would say.
That's a good thing. And something you said earlier that I think is important, and we can expand on that, which is artificial intelligence versus augmented intelligence. Really, the best way to adopt this, and what we've seen very successful, is starting slow, starting with this mindset that I'm just going to augment a process. I'm going to solve, or process improvement, as we used to like to say. So I'm going to use some form of intelligence to solve, to augment what human interactions are doing, or what I'm doing from a human resource perspective. So we're not trying to take a big chunk out of this technology that is so complex. What we're simply suggesting is that we can augment parts of our process using some form of intelligence, which we can have another discussion on what that means, but some form of computation or processing, because that's really all we're doing, is we're processing, and being able to show that you can solve problems. Now, and if the amazing thing is, this is why we see vendors, and we work with all of them. We work, especially the mega vendors. We spend hours and days and months and years with them, arguing with them about their strategy. And sometimes they have a good solution, sometimes they don't. But what's consistent is they're always trying to provide this service, making it easier for you to get started. So that's another part of this idea of looking at AI or machine learning even as this service that can be deployed quickly by using predefined models. For example, you see this a lot in language from Google. You see this a lot in vision applications from Microsoft. And so everyone has sort of their niche, or their area of expertise that they allow consumers to be able to use, customize, and be able to deploy in their environments. And that overwhelmingly has been the most success for adoption, because you can quickly use those services, customize them to be fit for purpose, deploy them very, very quickly, show the results, and get additional buy-in from there. So it's always good to start with this notion of augmented intelligence using either predefined models, if you can. Of course, it depends on the use case, using some of these technologies that are out of the box, but that you can customize. We like to call them highly customizable services, and then adding to those services to make them fit what you hope to achieve. And then that's been very, very successful.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I think the interesting thing is sometimes we don't even realize that we're using some of these, but they're there, right? So because to your point, we are a Microsoft environment here at McMaster, and so there
Mhm.
are a lot of ways in which Microsoft has started to push out or integrate some of this behind the scenes, to your point, is to deliver the services that we are quite happy to take use of. In other ways, we've got chatbots as an example.
Mhm.
Across various areas on campus, and there is a configuration capability with those to try and enhance what they can offer out of the box so that it's more bespoke to our environment as well, which is really important. I think that the sometimes it's about, and we talk a lot about this sort of storytelling and thinking about the future through digital moments, and dreaming about what our experiences might be like within our environment, because we do have so many different constituencies. So from a
Mhm.
central IT perspective, we're definitely of that service model mindset. We're trying to figure out, how do we deliver services better so that people can do more of what they want to do. And then there are
Absolutely.
the more deep dive kind of technology implementations that we see out in our faculties, as an example, or in some of the administrative areas, including our
Mhm.
registrar's office. So I think it's, sometimes it's hard to know what you should be trying to accomplish, because you just don't have enough examples of what's possible. So can you talk a little bit about some of the trends that you're seeing seeing that you think might be really applicable to a higher education environment based on, I mean, I'm not suggesting that you know everything about our environment, but I'm sure you've had conversations with people. What are some of the interesting trends that you think might be useful for us to be contemplating within our own environment?
So from a business perspective, and I've worked with a lot of universities, and one university in New York, I won't say their name, but has been really successful about using a more student approach to building their systems. What I mean by that is trying to better understand the behavior of the student with the goal of trying to avoid students that fall below what they need to do academically to stay within that realm. So the whole notion is, how can I detect when a better way of detecting when a student is struggling so that I can provide them the necessary help before things get really, really bad. So a lot of using that a very student approach and saying, I'm going to build services that helps us retain our students or improve the academic performance of students that need the assistance have been really, really successful. It's been demonstrating that there can be a strategic vision with how to solve the problem of retention, right? So that's been one of the, at least from what we're hearing, a common theme amongst university is retention. We want to be able to improve retaining students that might be struggling academically. And so that's one of the areas. The other is being able to build these systems directly into applications that students often use. So these services that I described earlier are really infused, or really well integrated into these existing systems that students often use, helping them find the necessary resources that they need to be successful. So those have been overwhelmingly the most positive things. And there's some things that we can do strategically that we're seeing emerging now around agenda creation or for focusing on particular topics and being able to define a curriculum automatically based on that. There's also another trend where we've always liked to say learning is different from everyone. So there's a new initiative that we're seeing emerging that are helping students learn material versus a non-traditional way using AI technology. And that's where you see a lot of the BERT classifications, for those that don't know, more of the natural language processing advancements that have been in place, where you can use that to sort of define more meaning around a series of texts. So if I'm reading it and I lack the ability to understand this, to comprehend, this is what would help. So there's a lot going on there that's very exciting that we see across the board, and we're really enthusiastic about helping these organizations be successful.
Thank you for that. I think that is really exciting, because it is, as we all know, what is the problem we're trying to solve, and then trying to find solutions that will assist us in resolving that. So you touched on a number of things that are big problems. And so if we can figure out ways to tap into some of these capabilities, and there's always that fine edge of being on the bleeding edge versus the leading edge. So it's great if you know people who've been able to do something and it's got success, or managed to achieve success, then it's an opportunity for us to try and tap into that and see, can we make it work for our environment. So I certainly respect that you didn't use the name of the institution, but we might talk later, and then I can find out who that is, and we can
Absolutely.
So like when you're thinking about this, maybe it'd be interesting to take this from the tact of, if I was to reach out to you today and say, Carlton, we're really trying to advance. One of the things that we're working on right now is an institutional CRM, as an example. We're really trying to advance our approach to looking at the whole, and looking at our student experience and how we help to support students. You've touched on some of those key pieces. Is there something that you think is important to think about first, from because the CRM obviously is about data again, but
Yep.
how do we make use of that? Have you any wisdom around CRM implementations and how AI might assist with that, or perhaps maybe even just on the data side of things, what you think are important things to consider?
Absolutely. So there are a lot of services that can quickly integrate with common CRM frameworks that are out that have been used. But CRM overall still has that theme of understanding the context around the data in their silos. So they have their own schema. The only difference is CRMs are usually packaging data around a specific schema, which is fine. But when I need to connect to different schemas, for example, if I have multiple CRM systems, which we see often, or I have an ERP that is integrated, or I want to integrate with my CRM, then it becomes a different ERP, then it becomes more of a challenging. So that's why we suggest this notion of two things that I want to highlight. and this is an old term, but it's being resurrected because of the technology that's available, like graph. We can talk about that at another date, but graph is a really powerful, just the notion of using graph theory as a mechanism for defining a data schema is a very, very powerful tool that we only used to do in academia, but now we're seeing it applied. But that is the master data management plan, focusing really on metadata, right? So the metadata management, and I don't mean to make it sound like it's a very complex, large project, but metadata management underneath the CRM platform, or even on top of a CRM platform, really allows you to future-proof that system so that you can grow with it. And it really does a good job of helping you define semantic layers. And there are so many new technologies that we're seeing as the foundation of what we now starting to be. You hear folks talk about this notion of data fabric or data mesh. That is where that's coming from. It's the ability to capture all the metadata behind multiple CRM systems if I need to manage them, but allow myself the ability to scale and grow and create new ontologies on top of that system and really expand. And that's where you see a lot of the use of graph underneath the hood of a metadata management plan.
That sounds complicated, but very interesting. I have to laugh. I sort of think over the decades, we've come up with more ways of defining pools of data pools, data lakes, data, you just introduced a few new ones that I hadn't heard before. So that's interesting too. So we recently had a conversation with Ismail Salim, the author of Exponential Organizations. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but
I am.
Yeah, love that book, and he was really an interesting person to listen to. And he talked a lot about technology and information and how advanced organizations are really harnessing technology and information exponentially in order to turn into these mega organizations that are able to do things at a scale that many of us will never be able to accomplish. And I'm curious what you think about that whole idea of the growth and the use of information to really advance. And I know that you deal with a lot of technology leaders, so I'm curious if you can talk a little bit about how you coach technology leaders, first of all, in applying some of these technologies, or thinking about them from a disruptive perspective, because it is about disruption to the status quo in order to really leap forward. And maybe we can just riff around that for a little bit. I'm really curious about how you engage with technology leaders on that front.
Sure. So the way we engage with technology leaders around this notion of exponential information, which is really about information dominance. It's a theory, and a very good one, that really speaks about this notion of having information dominance being driving everything that we do, with the notion that we understand that everything is streaming data, every physical thing, every computational thing, everything is streaming data. So we're going to manage and control everything that to achieve this notion of information dominance. And so what we try to do with that mindset, we help organizations and leaders really adopt that mindset and understand what it means. What it means is I need the capability to consume as much data as possible. Now, again, we can get into the details of how to do that, but the one thing that was missing is, how do I do that? There's a notion that that is floating around DoD called the speed of relevance. And that was really what the differentiator was, is in the competitive edge, is I want to achieve information dominance at the speed of relevance, right? So I want to understand when I need this information, how fast I need this information, and be capable of provisioning or deploying some form of analytic so quick that it's done when it needs to be done. So these two concepts are really what we're helping organizations understand how to achieve, right? So how do we first adopt the mindset? Second is, okay, how can we set our organization up to be successful, understanding that that's sort of our strategy, right? That's our marching orders, is we're saying we want to be information dominance, and we want to achieve the speed of information that's going to drive our organization across or through a competitive advantage. And being able to do that, being able to set our organizational structure up, understand what technology solutions we're going to need to be successful, or at least build that roadmap, is something we do a lot. And quite proudly, folks that have been following sort of this roadmap to achieve this have been very successful in learning new things about their organization.
And so first of all, I need to apologize because I transposed Salim male, and I don't know why I said Ismail Salim. So I apologize for that. So getting the name right is always important for people. So I apologize. The what you've talked about is really interesting because obviously from a technology leader perspective, we're thinking about strategy, but then how do we galvanize people around that philosophy or approach to advance things and get people on side? I mean, is it
Mhm.
facilitated sessions? Is it, a pilot project that you can prove capability around? What are your thoughts there?
So piloting certainly still works, and there's a couple of older techniques that have been out that we just fail to use to do this. And then one of the most successful ones have been this notion of a center of excellence or a center of competency, where we have this sort of plan that has been mapped out and successful that we can distribute to the organization. It really gave us this notion of economies of scale as we sort of spread this around the organization. So those are really good ways to get started, and we still see the success around those. But something that's new now that organizations are starting to do is, which is really interesting, is this sort of mini go-to-market strategy on data, which we often don't see. So we generally think of the go-to-market strategy, outside of a product, in the realm of a product. But what we're seeing now is this notion of, which is very similar to how technology organizations achieve what they want to do, is this notion that I can create sort of this go-to-market strategy with data, with the market being my end users or the market being my constituents, that allow me to highlight some of the success that we hope to achieve and how we're going to do that. That has been overwhelmingly successful. It sounds like it's a small thing, but what it helps understand is it helps everyone adopt this concept of exponential information or information dominance or speed in which we need this information to be able to achieve some sort of goal. And there's been a lot of buy-in from folks just understanding that that is the mindset we are applying, that these are the techniques that we're going to use to achieve that. Here's how we're going to build and integrate with other disciplines within our organization. And that has been a really fascinating concept. In fact, one thing I'll share is one of the newer concepts that we're seeing is this notion, especially in the public sector, is this notion of digital engineering. Now, we don't see that a lot in education because of the type of organization. But when you think about Volvo or BMW or Ford Motor Company that has to now say, well, my job is I've got manufacturing data from CAD systems, I've got information from my CRM or ERPs, and they don't talk, they're in completely different silos. So I have to build a plan. One of the things that came out of this is this concept of a digital thread and understanding how to manage this digital thread. Now, the argument that we often make is this digital thread concept can be applied to adopt or to gather buy-in for IT leaders, saying, I'm building digital threads that to achieve my AI technology solution ecosystem. And how I manage that digital thread, how far it stretches into across my organization, is something I can manage. And what you're hoping is that the organization will say, yes, I understand how to attach to that thread or leverage that thread to achieve some common goal. So there's been a lot of new techniques around how to really help the organization adopt these challenges, and information technology leaders are really taking advantage of these.
There's some new in terminology again, which is really fascinating. And I love what you've just said, because it is true. First of all, we love the idea of communities of practice or centers of excellence and all of that, because there are we have so many intelligent people in our McMaster IT community, not to mention just the general academic community, people who are doing really interesting things or who have a desire to accomplish things for their constituency base, and then trying to figure out how we can leverage some of that across the institution. So that scalability, of course, is critically important. And it's almost like you always have two channels working at the same time. There's always the, how do we keep the lights on, the operational, the foundational pieces, or as we refer to them, the seamless foundation pieces in place, so that this transformative activity can happen. And there's some tension that happens between that, because the speed to doing some of those things is really challenging. So that digital thread is a continuum, as I understand it.
That is correct.
And it works through all of that, but trying to articulate that in a way that people can understand it, I think that's the challenge, is really trying to figure out what language do you use, or how do you present that in a model that people can really grip onto. So if we were thinking about starting somewhere. So trying to get people to understand some of these concepts. Is there a, nobody's going to appreciate me saying this, but I say it anyway, because I love to just stir the pot a little bit, is there an AI for dummies kind of, like, is there something, and I'm in no way undermining, I know I've got extremely intelligent individuals even on this call who are probably very well versed in this space, but what would you say to people if we're trying to learn a little bit more so that we can come together and have contextual understanding? What do you think is a good way to get people started who are really nascent in this space?
So not to brag about our literature, but I will put a plug. I think and this is rightfully so. I think it's one of the best ways to get started understanding the entire package of what we hope AI can achieve. And that's what we call in the tech professional world, the solution path. And so we have a number of AI solution paths that are available. But the beauty around these solution paths is it helps break down into stages what you should be thinking about when, and maybe when you could possibly get started, even if you're not thinking about doing it right away. But it lays out a hierarchy of activities that you can do, and you can mix them around, of course, that allows you to better understand what you're trying to achieve. Now, a lot of that is around scoping the problem space, because we still do see that. We see folks say, well, we're doing AI because we thought it was cool. No, we should still be focusing on the problem space. But there are a number of steps after that, or we can do concurrently, that help the organization, that help the reader understand, I see the big picture of what we're hoping to achieve, and I can establish where I feel I am along that process. And so that's been really, really helpful. Outside of that, there have been a number of, and then I can share with you and the organization, a number of small pieces of literature that have come out of some very good technology vendors, surprisingly, in universities, that help establish sort of this framework of better understanding what AI is. So there's this notion of, do I completely understand what it is and what we hope to achieve, or versus, okay, let me understand a broad picture of what I need to do to make this a reality, and how far along the path do I feel we're at, or where do we need to gain more knowledge on? So those solution paths really help you do that.
Okay, I think that's really helpful, actually, and something that we can explore a little bit more. The interesting thing that you've talked about there is sometimes, we just find ourselves by default, if I can say it like that, the vendor changes something, or they're enhancing, we talked about this a little bit earlier, their service capability or their systems capability. And next thing you know, we behind the scenes, something's working really well for us, and there's an opportunity to leverage it. So maybe it's not so much about that initial thinking, but really suddenly here we are. How do we better use that? And how do we educate people around us to understand what's going on, and how systems are actually using AI again, or, because you're right. I think there's a sense that that we need to be able to say, we are implementing AI because it is a future, again, we can get caught up a little bit on the technology side of things. And what we're always trying to think about is, what's the end user experience, and how do we, just without telling them what's behind the curtain, how do we help them to see the advances that our systems are providing or offering to them? So interesting, some interesting challenges there between the joy of doing new and different and interesting things and just getting it done, right? That's
absolutely. And we're still struggling, right? Because from an IT centric perspective, we feel that the technology is important for us to grasp, but really what we're seeing information technology leaders and just business leaders in general are starting to realize is AI is really a business problem, right? It's pervasive throughout the system. There's a very important business aspect of it, but there are technology requirements that we need to achieve, and there are also other types of requirements like security, information security as such, and infrastructure and operations that need to all play together. In fact, and this is very common, by the way, so I don't want anyone to think that this has been solved. In fact, even Gartner is still struggling with this, trying to understand, where does it fit? Where does AI fit? And that is because it is so pervasive. We started it as a technology because it had so many technology arms. But now it is much more, and because we have technology that can deploy rapidly, it's much more of a business solution in the minds of many. or it's an infrastructure solution. Folks we used to call that AI ops, where you're thinking about just managing your infrastructure operationally using AI technologies to detect when systems will go down. So there's all these different contextual ways of applying AI. And I think we need to spend more time on the application, the intended application of AI to really develop a fit for purpose system.
Excellent. That's great. And I think that's a great way of telling us it's okay if we don't feel like we've got it all figured out, which I think is really
Absolutely.
important. And there's a lot of things that just as technology and as their environment, the environment generally continues to mature, that it feels like you're, when one hand you feel like you finally get a handle on something, and then something changes and you're far behind where you think you were as a result of that. And it sounds like this is one of those spaces as well. So I'm wondering, I know that everybody on the call here is listening in, and I want to give people the opportunity now to share out if you have any questions that you'd like to ask Carlton while we've got this great expertise and brilliant person with us. Please feel free to drop into the chat, and we can feather in your questions as well, because I think it's important. You all come at this from a different perspective as well. You may have your own ideas or things that you'd like to hear Carlton touch on, which I think is a really great opportunity for us. I'm curious for you how you found yourself being such an expert in this field. What was the draw for you, Carlton? If I can go back to more of the personal side of things. You've got all the degrees that you have. You've had a very wide array of experience, and now you're helping other people to find their way forward in this very large and very complex space. What is it about what you do and what you've learned over your career that you find quite exciting, that maybe will spark a little excitement in some of us?
Absolutely. So I played it. So one of the catalysts is I played a few roles, right? So I've been the developer, I've been the data scientist, I've been on the executive side, I've been an IT leader. And so I played a number of positions and I see the struggle, and I enjoy helping solving problems. But what's really driving my interest in this is developing new ways. It's the application of it. It's developing new ways to apply this and seeing this become more and more integrated into different disciplines. It always started in data and analytics. That was where I would say AI was born, right? We didn't call it AI. Again, we there was swarm intelligence back then. There was data mining, knowledge discovery. There's even peer-reviewed journals on that. So the neural network, for example, has been out for so long. I mean, it's ridiculous. But what's been really interesting is it's moving beyond the data space into other spaces where they see the need to understand a more data-centric approach, like application, which for the longest time it used to be application folks or software engineers would think, hey, I need to have an application-centric view of building my system. Now they're starting to say, well, wait a minute, let me learn more about this data thing, because it seems to be driving a lot of what we do, especially if I embed some of this processing into my application. So we're seeing this starting to become more and more pervasive across the discipline, and that really drives me to want to learn more. And that's something I'm a little shy on, I'll be honest with you. I have not looked at the core of the security model, for example, which is awkward because I came from the DoD space and then the intelligence space where security was important, but that was always someone else doing that. But understanding the new challenges in these other disciplines like rationalization and understand the efficacy, and the ethical and biasness of models and managing those models. The whole operational construct of AI is a very exciting space to be in. And there's a lot of theories out there, and we really enjoy helping clients. So that's really how I stay interested in engaged, is understanding how does this spread across different disciplines and how can I help them solve these problems?
Well, you can tell just by how you've shared all of what you've just said that you're quite passionate about this still, which I think is really amazing. And I'm curious for you, and I do have a question from a couple of our participants, so I want to go to that. But how do you stay current on this? Because it seems to me that with things changing so much, I mean, people come to you for currency of information. Where do you go? Like, who's your Gartner tap in for information on this?
So two ways. We have an extensive use of end users and so I get to see a diversity of challenges. So I speak to probably 500 or 600 different clients a year. My team speaks to thousands of them. So we're able to mine a lot of that data and say, oh yeah, so such and such organization tried this. It didn't work. And they called us and said, hey, why didn't it work? So we were able to mine and use that data that we're using. So that's one of our most powerful tooling pieces of tooling is the fact that we have so many clients calling us and sharing their challenges with us, giving us things to solve. The other one is stay engaged in the community. I do still stay very engaged. I'm still a data scientist by trade, I like to say. So I'm still trying out new algorithms, building things, testing technologies, and with the pervasiveness of being able to use infrastructure all over the place like cloud now, it's much easier to stand up an instance and to try some of their services or create and build. In fact, now folks are starting to really adopt this notion of low code AI development, which essentially means I don't need to have this massive amount of code. In fact, some argue that the code involved in AI is very, very small. So all of these provide an opportunity to really test, hone your skills, stay involved in communities that are engaged in advancing AI solutions. And there's a number of them, and being able to hear and listen to challenges coming from other organizations has been really how we stay up to speed and stay relevant.
That's great. So you just roll up your sleeves and keep on going, basically.
That's right.
So a couple of questions. So the first one from Diana McPherson: what
Mhm.
skill sets would you recommend for designing and analyzing data, AI or otherwise? Are data scientists always required, or can regular folk learn to do this? And I think that's a great question, because
Great question.
one of the things we all know is, we have to continue to evolve in how we approach things. So how much knowledge do we need, or how much professional training do we need?
Absolutely. So from the data analysis perspective, there's always this form of statistics that helps. It's not necessary though, but it does help to understand things like multivariate analysis, because we are looking at multiple variants of elements, and we want to be able to understand that in the context of features. I don't want to get too technical, but there are a lot of defining statistics that are born out of statistics that help, but it is absolutely not necessary. In fact, we have an essential guide that helps follow the sort of the curriculum and the skills that you need that demonstrate that. And really, it's more about problem solving and social sciences than it is about statistics now. And that is because technology is helping, right? We used to call that, there was this notion of automated machine learning that took a big chunk of that, saying, oh, we can actually tell you what classification algorithms you should be using. In fact, Microsoft does it so quietly that you often don't know. It's actually embedded in a lot of their SQL Server technology. Most folks don't even know it's there. So they do have, and when database administrators, some of the work that they used to do is now automated a lot from pre-canned machine learning algorithms that help them build schemas. So all of this is now embedded. So it's really about problem solving skills, being able to say, okay, I understand how to dissect this. I like to always say a systems view, not that I'm a systems because I'm a systems engineering, but because it does require you to break down this component into smaller chunks so that you can help understand how to develop and analyze data. But the statistics does help, not necessarily required. And some of the other fields that are really starting to help is a little bit of the engineering component of this, and that's more around the understanding of infrastructure and operations. So understanding what compute is compared to data, how to, and the cloud has been helping with that. So the reason why that is so important, I call it the infrastructure and operations skill. The reason that's important, or the engineering skill, is because we're starting to see so much of this, of what we do being distributed into very lightweight products, right? Which was the notion of IoT. We're seeing it even more now that folks are deploying I mean, my iPhone has a number of algorithms, as you know, but understanding what I need to perform on that particular system is something you get out of the infrastructure and operations space.
Very interesting. And your comment about the iPhone, I think that's one of the things that's quite interesting. We're almost like a bunch of little frogs that have been in the water as it's been heating up to boil.
Right.
It's all around us. And I don't know
Right.
that practically most people don't really think about what's going on behind the scenes with devices. I mean, this crowd of people certainly does, but yeah, it's fascinating. There's so much at our fingertips now that used to be so much more challenging to attain and even to really understand. And now it just works, which is
Absolutely. It's funny. It's one of the common algorithms Gartner used to actually work on years ago, was this notion of battery life that folks still to this day don't understand why their iPhone or the battery life of their iPhone or storage. Storage was actually the bigger piece, is folks would take pictures and run out. And now Apple implemented an algorithm that allows you that allows them to understand your behavior of using the application. So it'll, sort of take a little bit of the application away so that it doesn't use up space. For the longest, a lot of our clients didn't even know that function existed. So those are the silent techniques that I think we should highlight to say, hey, we can future opportunities.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you for that. Okay, James Haley has another question. In the context of a metadata management or data management approach of CRM content, would it mean that we're looking at implementation of a CRM tagging schema and using AI to help manage content? And so maybe around the CRM piece, because it is an area that we're exploring here on campus, maybe you've got some feedback on that. And then he had a secondary component to that.
Absolutely. So the metadata piece is really the construct here. The AI is how we're going to do different things. And there are other techniques that are being used within MDM and the metadata piece of that. And it's partially around tagging, but it's also around contextualizing in schema development. In other words, I don't necessarily, it can be schemaless, but I can define through an ontology using either graph or AI. AI has been used and graph is also being used to sort of manage that. And on top of that, I can add a semantic layer that is also that can be built out of AI. So the notion is, how do I take different sets of data, especially ones that are not necessarily schema related, or that I want to define a new schema, and create those schema or those contexts that I'm going to need to solve whatever problem I'm solving. So the AI, it's a pretty symbiotic relationship in that the AI is helping define that, but at the same time, the MDM, the metadata that you're actually capturing, is helping you understand contextually what is needed for AI to be to be effective. So it's a really interesting space, and we can get into a lot of more detailed ways of thinking about what that's going to look like in terms of the multiple contexts that are involved in CRM implementations. And that is just because the CRM systems are starting to expand and consume more context of data around the organization that's making this more relevant.
Absolutely. And I think that that's definitely something that will be part of our ongoing future now as we're getting into that space. So that's great. And then James had added in, have you seen applications of data cleanup and consolidation with AI? So is there a way to use AI for that?
Absolutely. That's actually an older technique, and actually started from companies like Informatica that used to want to do, what do they call it? I'm sorry, I'm blanking out. Data profiling. So now it's become a very, and again, those are some of the techniques that I think folks don't realize are embedded in a lot of the logical data warehouse applications out there, like SQL Server from Microsoft, for example. S3 does a little bit of it too from the AWS space. So there are, not S3, Redshift, Snowflake, of course, is using it to Snowflake even started. A lot of that was around them trying to be the more performance driven solution. So there's a lot of algorithmic use in actually cleaning data, understanding patterns in data, of course, but understanding how to essentially better profile that to create some sort of solution or to derive some sort of challenge that you need to overcome. So that's been used quite a bit. And there are a number of vendors that focus specifically on that I can share with you if needed.
Yeah, that's great. And I think it ties to an area that we're still relatively new in, which is around data governance, because the whole piece of, when we're here looking back thinking, why didn't we organize or do things with our data and ensure some, to James' point, how did we not have a better sense of the structure or implementation of systems to ensure that that data didn't need cleaning farther down the road. Now we're starting to implement data governance while we're continuing to advance our engagement and implementations around these more complex systems. So any thoughts or comments about data governance? I mean, obviously, I'm sure you're a huge proponent of it, but words of wisdom at all for any of us as we're engaging in that particular area?
For data governance, it's a marathon. That's the best way. It's not a sprint.
Yeah.
So MDM is the first step to that. So I think, even, and again, I'm not talking about the large monolithic MDM that everyone used to fear. I'm talking about more from a metadata perspective that has semantic layers on it. It has ways of cleaning data. You want to be careful though, because when you clean too much data without business knowledge, you sort of get in the way of data scientists who are doing exploratory analysis. So you sort of want to balance that. But the way to think about data governance is it's a marathon, but it's also one that can be highly distributed. So don't think that it needs to be this centralized object that controls all the flow of information. Remember what I said earlier, we're trying to achieve information dominance at the speed of relevance, right? So we want to make sure we're getting the information and being able to provision things quickly enough for them to be relevant for the end users that need that. So we want to make sure that we analyze the governance almost like we're analyzing a computer system, and it can be decomposed. It can be broken apart and allow different forms of governance bodies or governance units to be able to commingle and coexist and still achieve your goals. So I think that's what the misconceptions that a lot of our clients struggled with is they thought data governance had to be this big, huge board thing that everyone had to approve. And it's not like that. In fact, it's very distributed now. So it's more of a going back to graph. It's almost a graph. Governance has these nodes that do certain operations that share information with other nodes. And out of that, there's this governance philosophy that is achieved. It sort of emerges out of the interaction between those different nodes. So that's the best way to think about governance. It doesn't have to be one thing. It could be many things. It can be highly distributed, and it's a marathon.
Yeah, I love the marathon piece. I totally understand. I think all of this is really a marathon in some ways.
Yeah, true.
And yet we are trying to sprint really quickly to get caught up on things. So I think, definitely an area to come back to on the data governance piece. So I'm really interested in that. So we only have a couple of minutes. I've got one more question, and then we'll do a close up. So the last question from Dennis Tian is, what should we be careful about before stepping into AI applications, AI strategy, privacy, bias, et cetera? So and I think you had mentioned a little earlier the ethical aspect of some of this as well. So any thoughts you have on that before we finish up?
Absolutely. So you still want to have this information dominance approach, but you want to be careful on the application. So it's the application. It's we used to call that the last mile. It's when you get to the point to where you want to apply this into some system or some business process is really where I think a lot of folks miss the opportunity, which is why we're starting to see more books around ethical, because by the time you get downstream and you've said, hey, I want to collect all this data, I'm going to run these models against the data, I'm going to apply it to this, apply my algorithms to these models and deploy, then you get the end user saying, well, wait a minute, there's a credit check thing that's not working right, or there's some bias in these systems, and then you have to start all over. So one of the things I would advise and be careful of is make sure you consider the application, like how are you going to use it? I should say that. How are you intending to use these models before that? And one technique you can use is you can actually design for things you don't want. So you want to design for things for bias. You want to design for those things in your system early on before you wait and it gets deployed and you have to go back and redesign. So that would be something I would definitely watch out for.
The interesting thing about what you just said, Carlton, is this almost ability to see into the future, which, by the way, seems to be the challenge we've had all the way along to really feeling like we can leverage some of the technologies from our past. So we do need to be future focused, and I'm very much about future focused, but boy, we really can create our own future problems if we're not thinking forward and then backward.
That's right.
To set the path straight for ourselves. So huge complexity just even in trying to figure out how to achieve that, but that's a great wisdom all the way around. So I cannot believe a whole hour has gone by. That's felt like it was about 5 minutes, and definitely because of your engaging personality and also your great wisdom in this space. So thank you so much, Dr. Carlton Sapp.
Thank you, everyone.
Joining us today. You're a real pleasure. And I think all of us are going to walk away and have to rewatch this video to capture all the information that we probably just went by us like a huge wind, because there was just so much to consume. I really want to thank you. I want to thank Gartner also for lending us you for this hour, and you're just really quite an interesting individual. I'm sure people will have lots of maybe follow-up questions, and perhaps we'll get a chance to schedule a call and do some follow-up on a couple of the different streams that we touched on today. I also need to say a huge thank you to Tanya Reed and Peter McDonald for their organizing skills, and for our colleagues who are here from Gartner, John Taylor regular. I know Deborah Christmas was also very much involved in ensuring that you came today. So I'm going to give you the last word, Carlton, and thank you again for being part of our day.
It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you, everyone. And I look forward to continued discussions. I'm happy to help. Thank you.